Okay, so we're gonna read this Putin speech now. You know, Putin has been making a lot more public statements, trying to rally support for the war, try to rally support around himself going into the election. And so he made a big speech in front of a Star Wars ass Darth Vader setup crowd. Anyway, it was done in front of this crowd. And I was gonna read it. I thought we had video of it, but we only have the transcript, so I'm just gonna read the transcript. I'm gonna see how the rhetoric of Putin has, I don't know if escalated or, you know, how's this changed over time, or if he's just hitting the same old beats. I imagine he's just hitting the same old beats. But hey, people talking about negotiating, so let's see the tone. Let's see if Putin's in a negotiating tone right now. Your Holiness, friends, I would like to welcome all the participants in the World Russian People Council. The council was established in 1993. Remember that time as a very difficult turning point for the country. The council managed to unite around a common set of goals, representatives of the Russian Orthodox Church and other religious organizations, political parties and movements, cultural workers, scholars and scientists, entrepreneurs, and people of different beliefs, views, and ethnicities who are nonetheless united in one important respect, and their firmly rooted patriotism. First of all, I want to thank you for your support and contributing to strengthening the Russian state, civil peace and accord, and consolidating society, and for the help you always offer to your compatriots and everybody who is part of the big Russian world. I know that many representatives of the World Russian People community are currently in the Donbass and Novorossiya. This is the idea of like a greater Russia, and it's the area that makes up the Russian land bridge to Crimea right now. It's Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, Kherson. That area is Novorossiya. As volunteers and members of military units protecting our brothers and sisters, millions of people in Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, along with their brothers in arms, I sincerely value the help that the Russian World's People's Conference provides to the front and the families of the fallen heroes. They fought for us and for our motherland. They will rest in peace and remain in our memory for eternity. Let us observe a moment of silence. When I say in their memory for eternity, here's a question. How much do you guys hear about the Soviet-Afghan War? Or the first Russian-Chechen War? Because I don't see a lot of focusing in Russia on their losses or the people who die in their losses. I wonder how the narrative of the war will change depending upon success or failure for the Russian government. And how much they'll concentrate on the people. Will it be like World War II? You know, the great Russian patriotic war, well, they'll have signs of people. I really doubt it. I really do doubt it. But I mean, as the scale of this tragedy continues to increase, the more of an impact it has, I mean, the more likely I guess that becomes. Anyway, let's continue. Friends, our fight for sovereignty and justice is, without exaggeration, one of national liberation, because we are upholding the security and well-being of our people, our supreme historical right to be Russia, a strong independent power, a civilization state. See, this is interesting. So first off, he's saying that this is an act of national liberation. Of course, ignoring Ukrainian national identity. To conquer Ukraine is to achieve national liberation for the Russians. So it's almost as if he's describing the only way for Russia to exist, and how he describes it, the supreme historical right to Russia, to be Russia, a strong independent power. To be Russia is to be a civilizational state. To be Russia is to dominate in the way Russia's dominating. If Russia is to exist, it must exist as an empire. At least that seems to be the implication I'm getting. It is our country, it is the Russian world that has blocked the way of those who aspire to world domination and exceptionalism. It has happened many times in history. We are now fighting not just for Russia's freedom, but for the freedom of the whole world. Excluding Ukraine, I imagine. We can frankly say that the dictatorship of one hegemon is becoming decrepit. We see it, and everyone sees it now. That's oof. That almost feels irony pilled. That almost feels like it's seeping with irony, but I know it isn't. He's not describing himself, but it feels like he's describing himself. It is getting out of control, and it is simply dangerous for others. This is now clear to the global majority. I don't know if the Russian invasion of Ukraine is when people realized that American geopolitical unipolarity could be dangerous for those who fall on the other side of America's geopolitical machinations. I don't think it was the Russian invasion of Ukraine that sent that message. Maybe the American invasion of Iraq, maybe the American, American assassination of Soleimani or something like that. I don't know, but I don't think it was the Russian invasion of Ukraine that did that. And I would like to stress this: without a sovereign and strong Russia, no lasting and stable international system is possible. Why? Anyway, I don't know why. He didn't really back that up. He just declared it. We know that the threat we are opposing. Russophobia. Okay, that's the real reason they invaded. Russophobia and other forms of racism and neo-Nazism have almost become the official ideology of the Western ruling elites. They are directed not only against ethnic Russians, but against of all groups living in Russia: Tatars, Chechen, Avars, Tunisians, Bakshirs, Burats, Yakuts, Ossetians, Jews, etc., etc., etc. There are many of us. I might not be able to name every group now, but again, the threat is directed against all the peoples of Russia. Okay, so a few things I want to say here. Racism and neo-Nazism. Racism is a massive issue in Russia. If you look at the casualty rates for the Russian military, it is mostly Tuvans and people from Central Asia and the Russian prison system that are making a much higher percent. They make about a much higher percentage of those dying on the front lines. There's other instances of racism in Russian society I could point to, but moving on to the second part, neo-Nazism. Russia has in its army neo-Nazi units in Ukraine. Rusich is the clearest example. Its leader openly declares to be a neo-Nazi, and when people say, "You mean nationalist?" he says, "No, I mean Nazi. I am a Nazi." He's released guides on how to torture people and get away with it by using telephone books when you execute people so that the burn marks from the muzzle of the gun doesn't singe your skin. It's hard for anyone to take the neo-Nazism stuff seriously, and I mean, I don't know why they only talk about it now domestically anyway. It doesn't convince anyone internationally. And the Russophobia stuff, I don't know what Russophobia, because I mean, I know people in Ukraine who speak Russian, and they're allowed to speak Russian. And I'm not saying there's zero Russophobia in Ukraine, but the only way to decrease Russophobia isn't to invade and bomb and rape. It's just probably going to make people more Russophobic. They are directed not only against... Oh, we already read all that. The West has no need for such a large and multi-ethnic country as Russia as a matter of principle. So wait, as a matter of principle, the West is angry because Russia is multi-ethnic? We were Americans. Okay, whatever. Our diversity and unity of cultures, traditions, languages, and ethnicities simply do not fit the logic of Western racists and colonizers into their cruel plans for total depersonalization, separation, suppression, and exploitation. None of this makes any fucking sense. Who is he talking about? America hates us because we're diverse? Okay. That is why they have started their old rant again. They say that Russia is a prison of nations and that Russia are a nation of slaves. We have heard this many times throughout the centuries. Now we have also heard that Russia apparently needs to be decolonized. But what do they really want? They want to dismember and plunder Russia. If they cannot do it by force, they sow discord. The idea of splitting up Russia is a very radical position. I think I've only interviewed one person, maybe two, and one of them didn't even say it directly, but I think I've only ever interviewed one person, and it was a soldier who wanted to break apart Russia, decolonize Russia in that way, saying saying Tuva should be its own country, that Chechnya and Dagestan should be in its own country. And I'm not saying that Chechnya shouldn't or Dagestan shouldn't. I'm just saying that the entirety of Russia needs to be broken apart as a matter of fact. this is not a popular position in the American political establishment. This isn't even particularly a popular position in the Ukrainian political establishment. There are people in Ukraine who believe it, but as a matter of practice, the Ukrainian government's positions for victory is not, we must conquer Moscow and break up the Russian state, even if they would prefer a broken up Russia, since it wouldn't be invading them. But this position is not held widely within the Western Alliance, within NATO, within the EU. It's a really niche position held by mostly intellectuals that I know of, intellectuals that are not that well embedded in the American government. And I think just like a lot of Ukrainians. That's really it. I would like to emphasize that we view any outside interference or provocations to incite ethnic or religious conflict as an act of aggression against our country and an attempt to once again wield terrorism and extremism as a weapon against us, and we will respond accordingly. We have a large and diverse country. The diversity of cultures, traditions, and customs creates greater strength. Hey, diversity is our strength. Hey, man, we need to show this stuff to the far-right people who love Russia. Let's just throw this quote and nothing else. It'll work. A tremendous competitive advantage and potential. We must continuously strengthen it, treasure the diverse accord, which is our common asset. I would like all the regional governors to focus on this, and I count on the authority of the pastors in our traditional regions and responsibility of all political forces and public organizations. I believe we all remember and must remember the lessons of the 1917 revolution, the subsequent civil war, and the disintegration of the USSR in 1991. It may seem like many years have passed since then, but people of all ethnicities living today, even those born in the 21st century, are still paying now, decades later, for the miscalculations made at the time, indulgences and separatist illusions. Ooh, okay. So now we're getting real into the actual ideology and not just all the fluff. So the divulgence of separatist illusions. So during the Soviet Union, obviously one of the stretches, one of the motivating factors to its collapse was the fact that a lot of the countries that made up the Soviet Union didn't really want to be a part of it anymore. There was a lot of discontent in East Germany as they wanted to see Germany reunited under the Western style. They were seeing a lot of trouble in Poland in the Solidarity movement. In Romania, the Romanian dictatorship was losing control. It didn't have a lot of respect. In Ukraine, there were protests. There was the big protest movement between Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, where people chained arms together. And entertaining that separatism from from the Soviet Union, that's an illusion. And I think this is leaning into the Ukraine stuff. And if not about that, then I assume it has to maybe do with maybe like Chechnya. But I think this is the general area we're working in. The weakness of the central authority. Okay, so he's advocating for a strong central power. And a policy of artificial force division in the large Russian nation. So a triune of Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians. So he is saying again, and he said this before, that Ukraine and Belarus, these are artificial creations. I want to bring this up that he's saying it's a triune of Russians. So it's Belarusians too. And this isn't talked about a lot, but Russia also, or at least Vladimir Putin's government, wants to annex Belarus. He doesn't just believe that Ukraine is not really real, it's artificial, but he also believes the same thing about Belarus. And that's why Lukashenko has always historically kind of done a balancing act between Putin and the West, because Lukashenko didn't want to give up Belarus and his own sovereignty and independence, or like his own power. But he wants to abolish this artificialness, or he's at least calling it out, that, oh, there really is no difference between Belarusians and Russians, and Russians and Ukrainians. But for Ukrainians and Belarusians, there certainly is. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. And there are also real cultural differences. There are real differences between the Ukrainian and Russian language. The bloody conflicts that emerged after the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union not only continue to smolder, but sometimes flare up with renewed energy. These wounds will not be healed for a long time. We will never forget these mistakes and should not repeat them. I would like to emphasize once again, any attempt to sow ethnic or religious discord, to split our society, is betrayal, a crime against all of Russia. We will never allow anyone to divide Russia, the only country we have. Our prayers are for this, our homeland, and they are expressed in different languages. I would like to recall for this audience the words of St. Gregory of Nazianzus. Honoring your mother is a sacred thing, but everyone has their own mother, whereas the motherland is our common mother. Your Holiness, colleagues, the theme of this council session is the present and future of the Russian world. The Russian world embraces all generations of our predecessors and our descendants that will live after us. The Russian world means ancient Rus, the Tsardom of Muscovy, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and modern Russia that is reclaiming, reconsolidating, and augmenting its sovereignty as a global power. It's augmenting its sovereignty by invading another sovereign state. I mean, again, there's a perspective that Russia deserves empire. There's a perspective that Russia deserves to dominate its quote-unquote backyard. But when you're also, number one, that's a fucked prospect, period, because then that means we can do whatever fuck we want to the Cubans, we can do whatever we want to the Mexicans, because they're near us and we're bigger and stronger than them. I don't like that idea. But also, even if you accept that idea, Russia's the largest country in the world. It borders so many different nation states. That seems a little unfair. Across from, besides the fact that doing that to any country is unfair. But it's again, he talks as if Russia inherently deserves its superpower status, and its superpower status comes with dominating the quote-unquote Russian world, which is what this whole speech is about. The Russian world unites all those who feel a spiritual affinity with our motherland, who consider themselves Russian speakers and carriers of Russian history and culture, regardless of their ethnicity or religion. But I would like to emphasize that the Russian world and Russia itself do not and cannot exist without Russians as an ethnicity, without the Russian people. The statement does not contain any claim to superiority, exclusivity, or chosenness. This is simply a fact, just like our Constitutional's clear definition of the status of the Russian language as the language of a state-forming nation. I wish they treated that the same way in Ukraine, but whatever. Being Russian is more than a nationality. By the way, this has always been the cause throughout our country's history. Among other things, it includes cultural, spiritual, and historical identity. Being Russian is, above all, a responsibility. To reiterate, it is about the enormous responsibility to safeguard Russia, and that is what true patriotism is all about. As a Russian, I am here to say that only a united, strong, and sovereign Russia can guarantee the future and independent development of the Russian people and all other peoples who have lived within the borders of our country for centuries and are united by a common historical destiny. What does sovereignty mean for our state, for each family, and for each person? What is the value and true essence? Primarily, it's freedom. Freedom for Russia and our people, and therefore for each one of us. Because in our tradition, a person cannot feel free unless his loved ones, his children, and his fatherland are free. It's just hilarious, this coming from the regime where if you walk outside with a sign with nothing written on it, you get dragged off to prison. We're fighting for freedom. But how is Russia free? Is it free just because it's stronger than its neighboring states? Or is it free because its people are free? And its people certainly aren't, at least when it comes to whether it can critique its government, whether it can leave, whether it can exchange its currencies. It doesn't have financial freedom. It doesn't have political freedom. The civil society is being crushed. In what sense are they free? Our soldiers and officers, men and women of the country, are defending this genuine freedom. A free nation that understands its responsibility before current and future generations is the only source of power, sovereign power, which is called upon to serve all people, rather than someone's private, corporate, class, or even foreign interests. Basically, he's saying that your personal interests, your personal freedoms, stuff like this, put all that to the side for future generations. And that's true freedom. That's sovereign power. A truly free person is a creator, and we will support everyone's aspiration to be useful to the country, society, and people. This is what sovereign development in the national interest is made of. We are faced with the daunting task of developing vast areas from the Pacific to the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. Our economy, industry, agriculture, and innovative industries, creative industries, and national businesses must increase their capacity multiple times over. I'm now reaching out to entrepreneurs who I know are in the audience. I would like to thank you, friends, for your coordinated efforts. We have thwarted the unprecedented economic aggression of the West by uniting the efforts of the state and business, and sanctions blitzkrieg has failed. You know, when they say the sanctions blitzkrieg has failed, it has failed to stop the Russian war machine, but it has not failed to slow down the Russian war machine. If you look at the Russian war machine, they are trying very hard to smuggle in Western computer chips and Western parts for its weapon systems, because many of its Western systems were relying on those Western parts. And so they're doing their best to smuggle it in through other means. But even the barriers that have been put up have slowed down that production process, which is being felt, which is part of the reason why the Russians have had to wait so many months to store up enough drones and long-range missiles for them to heavily target the electrical grid as they're starting to do. If there was just a free flow of chips and munitions and stuff like that, then I think they might not even need to put it off. They could just continue the bombing campaign without interruption. Russia will step up support for sovereign national entrepreneurship. We have fundamentally new tools being developed for that right now. Invest in Russia, create new jobs, expand production, and participate in personal training. If you do that, the national economy will grow, creating more success and opportunities for our companies. By focusing on strengthening sovereignty, national businesses are growing stronger and more sovereign themselves. This is starting to sound like radically self-reliant, Juche style. It's going hard on it, as they shed dependence on the components of the current world order. The sovereign developments of the country, its economy, business, social sector, should bring well-being to all people, all Russian families, and thus be fair. This is not about a primitive one-size-fits-all approach. Justice means primarily decent living conditions, modern facilities for culture, healthcare, and sports in all regions of the country. This means a qualified and well-paying job and high public prestige for workers, engineers, teachers, doctors, artists, cultural figures, entrepreneurs, etc., 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 etc. Oh, here we go. Cancel culture. Look at this. The West is now pursuing a cancel culture policy, but this is in fact a nullification of humanitarian education. Oh no, the humanitarian education. That dastardly humanitarian education. As a result, both culture and education are becoming primitive. Many traditional subjects are simply being thrown out of Western academic programs and replaced by some gender or other similar sciences. I like the idea, like, sorry, we had Greek history, but now we have vagina history. Western knowledge. Pseudosciences, of course. In the meantime, we need a real breakthrough in cultural life. And we have a lot. This feels a lot like he's setting up this old idea of Russia has the destiny to fight against the degeneracy, fight against, well, before it was the Enlightenment, now it's like modern Western cultural degeneracy as God's, kingdom in Europe, as Russia's chosen destiny, its special place in history. It seems like it's leaning into those themes a lot that were thought up in the mid-19th century. We have a lot to learn in this respect from our predecessors that set the tone for the entirety of the world in both traditional and, by the way, avant-garde art. I am convinced that the country's sovereignty and strengthening in its role in the world are impossible without a flourishing, distinctive culture in all of its manifestations. And of course, we should take all the best achievements made by the domestic and global systems of traditional education. Importantly, our schools and universities must be modern and open to all advanced ideas. We need an integral, holistic approach to education, with family, education, national culture, children's youth, sports, military patriotic organizations, large-scale mentoring movements, and let me add, the wise word of our spiritual clergy harmoniously supplement each other. The latter is simply essential. Okay, how much longer does this go on? Oh, he talks about, he goes from this to talk about the church, how much they love Patriarch Kirill, and the church cannot be separated from society or from people, etc., etc., etc. He then talks about demographic challenges, that their spending isn't, that they need to spend money on it, but that's not it. He's talking about a solid moral foundation to fix their demographic crisis. Let's see. Thankfully, many of our ethnic groups have preserved the tradition of having strong multi-generational families. Let us preserve and revive these excellent traditions. And there's really a lot on here. I'm trying to preserve the population of Russia. Their demographic crisis has only gotten worse because of the war. More people have fled because their jobs have left in Western companies. Many people have fled because they didn't want to get drafted. A lot of their young, strong, working age population has been dedicated to the war. So Russia's in a tough space demographically, and they already had a demographic crisis before the war as well. They already had population decline. The war has just worsened it. That's why a lot of people speculate about many of the Ukrainian children that have been kidnapped. For example, there's an example of a missing Ukrainian child being found to have been kidnapped and renamed by top Putin ally. They changed their name after kidnapping them when they were like 1, and now they're in their care. Some people say that this was somewhat emphasized by the Russian government, or attempted by the Russian government, to try to fix the demographic crisis or try to supplement it. I don't really know, though. It's just speculative. Where were we? Oh, yes, here we are. You know, Your Holiness, friends, we have many ambitious goals before us, and fulfilling them requires a truly concentrated effort, which we are ready for. We have become stronger. Our historical regions have returned to Russia. Well, you still don't have Zaporozhye. You still don't have Kherson. You still don't have, you know, all of Donetsk or the Donbass. So, like, that's the thing, is they announced these annexations when they didn't have full control of them. That was the mistake they made. That was the real mistake they made. It's always the mission accomplished sign before mission is accomplished. Society is rejecting everything superficial and turning to true and genuine values. Pyotr Stopolin emphasized that law based on national power takes precedence. Together, we have shown such national strength and national will, the determination to uphold our fundamental interests. He's calling for willpower in the face of all these troubles. The fundamental interests of our people, of Russia, to be guided not by someone else's borrowed views, but by our own sovereign worldviews. Our understanding, he's rejecting the Western foreign way of doing things. Our understanding of how the family and the entire country should live, and to build Russia for ourselves and our children. I'd like to thank you again for your support and patriotism. I would like to address special words of thanks to Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. This is the guy who said that if you go to Ukraine and die fighting the Ukrainians, you go to heaven. I'm aware of your tireless work, Your Holiness, to bring about the spiritual revival of Russia, and of the importance of the influence of your position. I want to emphasize this. Under your leadership, the Russian Orthodox Church, clergy, and laity do much to implement social, charitable, and volunteer projects. I'm also aware of the support provided to our servicemen and their families, and how eagerly our soldiers and officers on the front line seek out the Patriarch's words. I am pleased today at the World's Russian People's Council to congratulate you on being awarded the 2023 Presidential Prize for your contribution to strengthening the unity of the Russian nation. You have my deepest respect. Thank you. I think there's some more stuff here, but none of it is. It's all like Great Patriotic War. It's all the same essential stuff. But I want to emphasize a few things. He emphasizes the artificialness of Ukraine and Belarus, meaning that he's doubling down and continuing to double down on what he said at the start of the war, which is that Ukraine is an artificial state, and therefore Russia has the right to take away that artificial veil and reabsorb Ukraine by force and destroy its national identity, destroy the Ukrainian identity, absorb it, and make it Russia again. And it's also extending that to seemingly to Belarus as well, which has been an open secret for Russia watchers for a very long time now. There's a lot of emphasis on, you know, the need to stand up against the West and strength. But what I really found interesting was how long he concentrated on the need to keep Russia united, and how diversity is good, and how many different ethnicities made up Russia, and how all these ethnicities come together to bring about Russia, and that, you know, the separatist illusion. I think after the pogroms, or the pogrom that recently happened in Dagestan, and some murmurs in Dagestan and other areas in the Caucasus, and seeing how much the system is having to strain to funnel enough supplies and weapons to Ukraine, with Russia bringing back air defense systems from Siberia and bringing back air defense systems from Kaliningrad in order to try to funnel it into the war effort. If there was another security crisis in Russia right now, could Russia deal with it? I mean, we can say that there were other political reasons as to why Russia did not jump to Armenia's aid. But let's say that there was another protest movement in Kazakhstan due to, you know, the taking away of fuel subsidies, like happened last time. Would Russia have the troops necessary to put that down? And would the protesters feel motivated by the fact and then go further because of Russia's preoccupation with the war in Ukraine? Something to think about. I think there's a reason as to why he's concentrating on that area so much. Putin's speeches, still as boring as ever, though.